Welcome. Today we're diving into two really intense chapters from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 6 and 7. And we're going to be looking at them through the lens of scholar Dr. Leslie Allen, exploring a prophecy that, believe me, is not about hope. It's about the absolute destruction of the land of Israel. Okay, so to really get this, you got to put yourself in their shoes. Imagine you're one of the elites of Jerusalem, carted off as a prisoner of war to Babylonia back in 597 BCE. You're stuck in this flat, foreign country, and all you do is dream of your beautiful, mountainous homeland. You're just holding on to this desperate hope that you'll be going home soon. And then the prophet Ezekiel gets up and delivers a message. But it's not the one you want to hear. It's a message of total annihilation.
So the way Ezekiel kicks this whole thing off is kind of weird. He doesn't actually talk to the people right away. Instead, he's told to set his face toward the mountains of Israel. It's this powerful symbolic speech aimed at the very landscape his exiled audience is longing for: the mountains, the hills, the ravines, the whole scene of their home.
And that contrast is what makes this so incredibly powerful. You've got Ezekiel speaking to a landscape that's hundreds of miles away, but every single word is designed to land like a hammer blow on the exiles listening to him, just shattering any false hope they had about going home. Okay, so you might be asking, why the mountains? How can a landscape be guilty of anything? Well, the reason is that those mountains were home to something known as the high places. Yeah. These weren't just pretty viewpoints. As Dr. Allen puts it, they were basically the local places of worship, kind of like the church around the corner. But here's the thing. They had two major problems. First, they went against the idea that there should only be one central place of worship in Jerusalem. And second, and this is the big one, they had become centers for idolatry worship. And look, this wasn't some minor rule they were breaking. No, this hits right at the absolute core of their covenant with God. Using idols in worship was a direct violation of the Ten Commandments. For a priest like Ezekiel, this sin was it. It was the justification for destroying the entire land. And the punishment he describes? Wow, it is brutally specific. This isn't just about killing people. It's about total, absolute desecration. The idea of throwing corpses and scattering bones all over these altars, that would make these so-called holy places permanently unclean, ritually defiled, and completely unusable for worship. Ever again. All right, so then we get to chapter 7, and Ezekiel totally changes his approach. He creates this feeling of absolute, unavoidable doom. He just hammers his audience with one terrifying phrase over and over, making the disaster feel like it's already here. First, he just drops this idea into the air. An end has come. It's stark, it's simple, and it's chilling. And then he says it again, but with this terrifying finality. The end has come. See the shift? It's not just an end anymore, it's the end. It's a done deal. That repetition would have been absolutely terrifying to hear. And finally, he brings it all into focus. He goes from a general idea to a specific moment in time. The day is near. Now, this is a direct shot at the day of the Lord, something many people hoped would be a day of victory. But Ezekiel flips that hope completely on its head. He's saying, no, this day is going to be one of pure darkness and judgment. So where's he getting all this? Is he just making it up? Not at all. He's actually quoting an earlier prophet, Amos, who had correctly predicted the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel. By using Amos's exact words, Ezekiel is essentially saying, hey, remember what happened to them? Well, now it's your turn. So, this is the million-dollar question, right? How does a prophet prove his message is from God and not just his own grim imagination? Well, Ezekiel has an answer. He anchors his entire prophecy in Israel's most sacred texts, the priestly law itself. I mean, just look at this side by side. Ezekiel is systematically pulling phrases, practically word for word, from the list of curses in the book of Leviticus. It's like he's pulling out their own rulebook and saying, see, right here, this is the penalty you all agreed to if you broke the rules. The bill is due. And that's what made his message so absolutely crushing. He wasn't just predicting some random disaster. He was arguing that this catastrophe was the legally stipulated, long foretold outcome of breaking their covenant. For his audience of educated exiles, this would have felt like an undeniable, airtight case. There was no escaping it. But it's not all just fire and fury.
In the middle of all this, Ezekiel gives us this really rare and fascinating peek into God's emotional state. This judgment isn't being delivered by some cold, distant deity. It's coming from a place of really deep and conflicting emotions. So on one hand, you have this profound grief, this real personal pain. The text actually says God was crushed by the people's betrayal. But on the other hand, there's this fierce, righteous anger, which is expressed through these gestures of pure indignation, clapping hands, stamping a foot. It really feels like the complex reaction of a heartbroken parent to a child who's gone completely off the rails. And Dr. Allen really nails it with an analogy we've probably all heard. This hurts me more than it hurts you. It just perfectly captures the feeling here. This destruction has to happen. It's a necessary consequence, but it's causing deep psychological pain to God, the very one carrying it out.
So, what's the bottom line here? Ezekiel's prophecy was brutal, yes, but it was also authoritative and deeply emotional, all designed to just shatter the false hopes of the people listening. He literally used their own sacred history against them to prove that the end wasn't just coming, it was the just fulfillment of God's own word. And that leaves us with a pretty big question. When a message claims such ancient authority, what does that mean for us today?